but I'm happy to talk about a few of the sculptures, talk about the history of the sculpture trail, and then answer some questions. And then maybe, I know Lori takes a lot of people on tours of the sculpture trail, and you can tell me what people seem to be asked about the most maybe, and we can be somewhat efficient that way. But the sculpture trail is, and I'm not going to remember exactly how old now,
2008.
2008.
I think.
Wow.
Well, 2008 is Moose Flat.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Or,
Yeah.
But
I think it's
Ibis was here before that. It was
Oh, maybe that was when it was.
6 or 8.
Okay, so the sculpture trail's been around almost 10 years, I would say.
In fact, I remember my granddaughter was here. She saw this box come into the parking lot down there, and she was here for the unveiling of the Ibis. And she was about 5,
yes.
and she's now 16.
The unveilings were really exciting, and we did one for the 25th anniversary.
It's got a really good
And
app.
we did a bunch for the 25th anniversary. And there's a fabulous app.
Yeah,
I'm
the
glad
app
you
is
said
really
that.
good.
So the best way for you to fill in the gaps or prepare for a tour, if you're giving a sculpture trail tour, is to download the museum app that covers every piece of sculpture on the sculpture trail, including the pieces that have been here longer than the sculpture trail, like the white-tailed deer looking back by Ken Bunn and Walter Mataya's wild turkeys. So we're going back a little bit. When this building came into being, some sculptures were acquired for the opening of the museum on this location, like the change of seasons, Stevie Kelsey, the big bison up by the parking lot was in, the doe that I just mentioned. The turkeys came a little bit later. There was a Sandy Scott Eagle sculpture right across here.
Yes.
But there was no plan for the acquisition of sculpture, and it was kind of like when a piece would be donated, it would be put somewhere. And we started to realize there needs to be a plan, and we can't just kind of start plopping them wherever without a comprehensive plan. So we started talking about a sculpture trail, and most of us, I think, had in mind some kind of a footpath up the hillside off that way, because it's a nice little hike, and some of us have been in places where you can go on a little hike and see some sculpture. We weren't really sure, what we wanted. We just knew we wanted more of a plan. So the museum hired 3 landscape architects to come and give presentations, and then we were to pick one, and 2 of the 3 presented something that was like a little loop up on the hillside, like we had been kind of talking about. And then Walter Hood, who was ultimately the one we selected, he came, and he, each of them came for a site visit. And Walter Hood came, and I can remember him standing right here. And it used to be, some of you will remember this, you could drive up here, let people off at the front entrance, go park, and then you would exit behind this berm, but it was only wide enough to accommodate 1 car going that way. Walter Hood said, here's what you need. He said, you need to make this a pedestrian-friendly area. You need to widen that road back there to accommodate incoming and outgoing traffic. And he was going off about this, and I remember thinking, we just wanted a sculpture trail. This is much bigger than we had thought about. But, he had other ideas also for the sculpture trail. And he said, if you put sculpture on a pathway winding up through the sage, it will disappear. You won't see it because of the context of this place is so massive and big. And so he created what he called an edge condition. And the sculpture trail itself, we're standing along the edge of it right now. The main part of the sculpture trail is this 3/4 mile long concrete pathway that goes from the presidential eagle sculpture, you can see way at the south end of the property, goes along the edge where the property drops off, comes across the front of the building, and goes all the way up to just beyond the Ibis sculpture, Isis, by Simon Gudgeon, and again the property drops off. So his thinking was, and it was really very smart, because it works just the way he said it would, when you place the sculpture along that edge, the land drops off, and you have that distant landscape beyond, and it really stands out. It creates this great stage kind of for you to enjoy the sculpture along. And when the big bison herd sculpture by Richard Loeffler called Buffalo Trail went in, we knew how big it was going to be, and I think we thought it was going to make such a huge impression for people driving north, and then they'd see the museum up here. Well, in fact, like Walter Hood said, when you put a massive sculpture in this massive landscape surrounded by sage, it kind of disappears. Which, we were all shocked at how that right away started to blend in with the landscape, even though that herd of bison is so huge. So we all appreciate the fact that Walter Hood was selected and his vision for what the sculpture trail could be. We started that right after the sculpture trail was completed. We started relocating some of the existing sculpture and then acquiring some new works for the sculpture trail, but it's by no means full. We envision, I've heard Adam say this, ultimately up to about 30 works of art along the sculpture trail. So there will be more to come. The works that are acquired for the sculpture trail, they are acquired the same way that anything for the inside collection is acquired. It has to be brought before the collections committee. It needs final approval from them. It has to fit certain criteria. And I've seen the special document we have for consideration. It's items for consideration for things on the sculpture trail, and we say things like it should play with scale, things that are outside. They should play with the environment, the wind, the rain, the changing light. So it would be fun at some point. I'll dig that document up and share it with all of you, because we will be acquiring more works. And if you ever see something that you think this would be perfect, we'd love you to bring it to our attention, because it's been a little while since we put something new out here. And it's time we got more new things out here, I think, because it's so exciting to have things come out on the sculpture trail. So far, it's all North American animals kind of from this region. Whether it stays that way, I'm not sure, but that's the way it has been so far.
My husband Ken says that the sagebrush should be cut better around the bison. I said, then you better get up there and cut that down.
I know,
Because it is kind of hidden sometimes.
It's more and more hidden. So, a little bit about Walter Hood. Some of you had the chance to meet him when he was here building the sculpture trail. He's a very talented landscape architect. He has his own landscape architecture firm called Hood Design, based out of Oakland, California. He also is an architecture and landscape architecture professor at Berkeley. He's very busy, and he's done things all over. He's kind of this rock star landscape architect, so I feel lucky that we got him. He was really fun to work with. And one thing that he's known for is taking space that is being underutilized and making it into something else, instead of always claiming new space. Like if we had constructed something up the hillside, that would have involved, quite a bit of excavating, claiming new space. That's not what he's about. He's about, he came here and he looked at this parking lot, and he looked at this parking lot, and he said, you're overparked. Which is true. Most of the time, we have empty spots, and especially that back then. So when you look down at the south parking lot, there are 2 rows of cars. It used to be 3 rows of cars. It was wider.
We parked in the middle.
We parked in the middle as well. And so he took space away from that to narrow that parking lot, which created room for the sculpture trail right along the edge. Similarly, up here, cars used to park on the right-hand side of that, where the curb is. People pulled in like this, and he again took that away. We pulled it back to make room for the edge condition or the sculpture trail along there. Any questions about Walter Hood or the history of the sculpture trail?
And I was wrong on my dates. The granddaughter was older.
Oh,
She was at 5.
I was going to say 10
Okay.
years.
She was more like 10.
Yeah, I was gonna say we put it in around 10 years ago, but it was
Yes.
like it didn't. It was like finished, and then the whole winter went by before people actually started using the space. So it might be like around 9 years since we've been using the space.
I think I have a photo. I'll check it.
But for those of you who remember, we were redoing the rock exterior of the building the very same summer we were constructing the sculpture trail, and the same construction firm was doing both. and it was pretty crazy around here. We stayed open.
So let's talk about Gwyn Mural Coyote. I always forget which one. Coyote 5 and Coyote 8, I think. Could be vice versa. But anyway, Gwyn Mural is a living artist, and she has created a number of coyotes, and these two were not necessarily intended to go together, but we purchased them at the same time, and Adam had this vision of placing them in relation to each other, which she does herself. She creates these individual sculptures, and then she enjoys placing them in relation to each other. So when we were deciding this, Adam was really deliberate about how much space between them, the fact that they're looking at each other, are they going to be exactly lined up or a little bit offset? But they're beautiful pieces. They are not supposed to be climbing pieces, and if you see kids sitting on them, soon we will have labels that say please do not climb on the sculpture. Those are coming. But speaking of labels, you'll notice there are no labels. The app has all that information. It's really good, but the labels are coming. In fact, I think they're being produced right now, and they're going to be really nice. It's beautiful stainless steel, low, with all that information. So,
Did she do also on the museum guide, there's a map on the back with the legend
sculpture
of
to
who the artist is
in the name.
name of the
Oh, that's a
sculpture.
good reminder.
Did she do this before or after she did the circus cat that we have inside?
I think after, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Good question.
Because that
I'm
was
not 100%
2000
sure of that.
maybe, because that was
Yeah.
100 years after.
Okay. I think these are more recent, but I could be wrong.
I see a few things that I want to point out to people. And one is, which I didn't mention before, was kind of the timing. When we created the sculpture trail, there was some really, and it was really luck was what it was, that we were ready to build the sculpture trail right at the time when the Teton County, the Pathways organization, was building this bike path down here. So right when they were planning that, we were planning this, and we had this thought, wouldn't it be great if they connected? And they decided we didn't have to pay for it. They decided to put in the underpass down there to bring people safely under the highway. And it was just such a great thing that it all came together at the same time. Similarly, the animal-shaped bike racks that you see, that was a collaboration with the Pathways organization. And we hired Ben Roth, who's a local artist, to create the animal designs, and he created 2 sets. There's a set down by the tunnel, which Pathways paid for, and then a set that we have up by our front door, which we paid for. So it was this really nice collaboration. So the connection came through, and then we built our trail right at the same time, so with the idea that people can ride up from town, come visit the museum. It's a nice distance. And of course, as you know, the pathway continues now all the way on up. But this was all happening right at the exact same time. Walter Hood's design, I should mention, and this is something I learned. I didn't know that landscape architects did the big scope of what they do, but he designed this bench. He designed the other benches. He designed what he called the plinth. We didn't know what sculpture was coming or where exactly it would go, which bothered him quite a bit. You've got to tell me what sculpture is coming and where it's going, which we couldn't do. So he created these slight plinths or pedestal, and he left them blank with the idea that when sculpture arrived, we could place some sculpture there, which we did do with the Gwyn Mural coyotes that are now nicely placed. But if you walk north, you'll see there are a few other of those plinths that have nothing on them yet. They're waiting for something to arrive. Other things that were part of his design, he was very particular about scoring the concrete the way that it is. He was very particular about the way that it does these subtle zigs and zags, the way that it does very subtle inclines and declines, which you really have to look and get down low to start to really notice. But when you're walking, you're kind of going up and down a little bit. That was all a very intentional part of his design as well. So for the sculpture, some of the first pieces that went in were Sandy Scott's Presidential Eagle, and some of you may remember some of the rocks that surround that used to be down at the entrance, And when this sculptural piece was coming, we decided to reposition those rocks around the sculpture. Sandy Scott, just a little bit about her. Some of you probably talk about her as she was trained as an airline pilot, and she's very interested in birds and aerodynamics. And this piece is a good example of that. And she talks about, as a sculptor, you sculpt what you know, and she understands flight and aerodynamics, and quite often sculpts birds. She also did the moose, by the way, that's up at the north end.
I
of the trail.
remember when this was unveiled,
Uh-huh.
and we asked her, "Is that eagle flying, landing, taking off?"
Oh.
She said, "All three."
All three?
She
Interesting.
said, "I've studied eagles," and she said, "I wanted to capture
Uh-huh.
all of it in one sculpture."
Interesting. Very nice. And it's called Presidential Eagle because there is one at the Clinton Library in Arkansas, and that one was in. Ours is not now. Somebody help me remember
I think
the
ours is
editions.
number 1 and
Ours
that
is
one's
number
number
1, and that one is number 2. And we acquired it, and we knew it was ours before we had a place exactly to place.
You know, the seating is great. It's very important if you want people to walk, to have a place they can just sit and look
Right.
at. So I think the seating is great.
Yeah.
Jane, are these all bronzes then?
They are.
And did they use that lost wax
Yes.
technique?
Uh-huh. Absolutely. And so a piece of that size would have to be cast in a number of different pieces, and then welded together, and then the seams all chased to eliminate any visibility of the seams. But yes, she works. Sandy Scott, a number of our volunteers have been to her foundry, which is in Landry.
Right. That was one of the.
It was fascinating.
Every time you see a sculpture now, after being in the foundry, you look at a sculpture totally different. So that would be another good trip to do maybe next year for those that haven't done it. Because I look at sculptures now.
Eagle Bronze, right, is the name of the
Yeah.
foundry? Eagle Bronze in
Correct.
Landry.
Look at bronze is totally different every time being there.
So a little bit about Richard Loeffler's Buffalo Trail. That piece, you know, there's a story behind each piece and how we decided to acquire it, whether it was donated, whether it was purchased, whether, in this case, Kavar Kerr had purchased a small maquette or a small version of this, which the museum has isn't in its collection. Some of you, it's in the members' lounge, right, above the mantle above the fireplace, and Kavar Kerr started talking with Richard Loeffler about doing a monumental piece, and he was working on this for years. I can't remember exactly how many years. He's a Canadian artist, and I think his foundry is in Montana. I could be wrong about that, but when this piece finally arrived, it was like, you know, it came on all these trucks and flatbeds, and they actually, if you go way to the north, there's a road, the gravel pathway kind of that you see coming down. That's how they were brought onto the site. And we're not going to walk down there right now, but you really need, I tell people, you really need to walk down there to fully appreciate them, because again, you don't understand the size until you're standing right there. Lori, do you take people down there sometimes?
When I have young people and it's part of their thing, and they're always like, I'm like, no, go stand under it.
Yeah.
And if people have kids that have a lot of energy that they're trying to
Right.
expend,
Right.
Oh, that's
go.
a good idea. How do you get down there?
just step.
Yeah,
There's
there are
steps
two
over there.
ways. There's a set of stairs right here.
Okay.
And we'll point them out as we walk back. And there's a footpath at this end.
Oh,
So you can actually make a loop. If you go down the footpath at the south end, you can loop around and come up the stairs, or vice versa. But it's it's worth walking down. I always tell visitors.
When that came into the museum, it was a challenge to see, and they also said he had quite a challenge coming through customs at the border.
Right.
But they brought it up here, and then to watch them trying to get it around, it was a challenge.
Yeah.
Especially with
Yeah.
the larger pieces.
And now when these large pieces came in, we introduced them to the public officially with an unveiling that was at mixed media events in the evening in the summer. And we had these huge, we still have them in the basement, parachutes that covered them.
Yes.
And then when it was time, the curatorial staff and some of the education staff would be like yanking off the parachutes. Sometimes they get stuck, and Adam had these long, like, pieces of wood to poke it over the top. But it was fun. It was exciting to unveil them. Let's just wander back this way. And we probably will not go up to the north end today just because of the time, but that's good. That's something for another day. Walter Hood's design was the metal stairs that were fabricated and trucked in and put in place. So the metal stairs that are here and also in the front side of the building were part of his design, which I think the ones in the front side of the building, even though they don't get used a lot, they kind of visually communicate that people are coming to this place, and I think it really helps when people used to drive by and think, I don't see any sign of life up there. Before we even had the flag, it used to be you couldn't see the cars. It used to be when we first were here, these cars were backed up farther away from the edge a little bit because we had the space, and you literally saw no sign of humanity when you drove up past the museum. But now you see a little hint of cars, you see the flag, you see the stairs coming up, and I think it all helps to communicate that we're open, there's stuff happening up here. This is a place for people. I was going to say something else. Oh, Walter Hood also designed what he calls the bollards, the light bollards, like this one here. And it creates this really nice low-level light at nighttime. We used to have no light, well, out here at all. The benches have low-level lights. The plank benches at nighttime, you don't see them unless you're walking out here at night. And that one fault in the design was it was too dark here. So after an evening event, people walking across, so security worked and they put a big brighter light on his light bollard here to just illuminate that crossing. So that was not his design, but it was our necessity. Yeah.
Safety necessity.
Jane, there's really no way to get from here
To the stairs. No, and he did play with that, and at one time he had a little pathway going along the side here, but it was too tight. Yeah. But Black Timber Bugler, this was part of his design, going up the stairs, going up to the sculpture. Some of you may remember Tim Schinnebarger's Black Timber Bugler used to be up where Sandy Scott's moose is now. And when the sculpture trail was being constructed, we had to move any sculpture that was in the way to protect it. And it was moved up there. The thought was that it would be temporary, but everybody loved it so much that I think we convinced Adam, keep it there, keep it
But
there.
the artist didn't want it there, and we said, oh, but we love it there. It's a greeting to us when we come down the hill here.
And then, yes, the sage has grown up, and it's, you know, maybe a little harder to see than it was when it first went up there, but I love it up there.
Perfect.
So Tim Schinnebarger, speaking of artists on the trail, that piece is his, and he also did Great Northern, which is the mountain goat, which is up by the bus dropping off area.
Now what is this guy here?
Yeah, we're going to talk about this one. So Joe Barrington is the artist, and it's a horned toad.
Oh.
And this piece was acquired back when Francine Carrara was our director. She was from Texas, and Francine knew a lot of these regional artists from Texas, and she knew Joe Barrington. He grew up in Texas, and she and he were friends, and she acquired this piece for us. He came one summer and was artist in residence, and then this piece was acquired, but we didn't really have a place for it. This was before we had the sculpture trail. So for several years, it was back on the cafe terrace on a wooden pallet and just sat there. So when the sculpture trail was built, we decided to put it right here. It's a really interesting creature. A lot of people don't know much about horned toads, which is a native to Wyoming, but just not this part of Wyoming. So they are in other parts, drier parts of Wyoming. But a horned toad, as some of you may know, is not actually a toad, it's a lizard. And it's called a horned toad because, I wanted to say lizard, horned toad because it has these spines, these spikes, bumpy spines on its back. There are many subspecies of horned toads. Some of them can puff up their body 2 times its natural size to scare off predators, and others can shoot out blood from blood vessels in their eyes to scare away predators. Like a repellent.
Wow.
And they're not this big in real life, I should say. Just about everything outside is much bigger than real life because it kind of has to be. Rock piles, we have rock piles in various places. Fortunately, there's a lot of rock on this property when you look around. So we didn't have to bring in any rocks. Any rocks that were used in the design were already here.
Because they're expensive.
Yeah. So you might wonder once in a while about this rock pile. If you don't, good, because it's blending in. But this rock pile didn't used to be here. But in order to make room for this trail right here, we had to excavate down. And when we excavated soil away to go down, the edge of the building was exposed, just this ugly cement. And so something had to be done. So the rock piles are hiding that exposed concrete. But the animals, the ground squirrels love it. And I think it looks okay.
Yeah, that's great.
You might wonder about these bollards here as well. When we first put in decided to make this a footpath and not a place you can drive, some people were really worried about that. It's like, but we'd like to drive right up to the museum entrance and drop people off. And there was enough opposition that we had to create a compromise, which was to put in these bollards so that once in a while, if people need to drive up through here, we can actually come out and unscrew these and remove them and then open it up to traffic again, which is kind of unfortunate because it's a pain to do. And at this point, the culture has changed where people walk here and they think they're safe from cars. So they don't, expect traffic to be coming through. I notice over the years, it's become less and less, fewer and fewer times that we're required to take down the bollards and let cars drive through. So hopefully in the future, it will never happen again.
Jane, what kind of frog is what
Oh, yeah.
if somebody asks?
This is Idaho quartzite.
Okay, it's all quartzite, just different shades of it.
Yep, from a quarry in Idaho.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.